So to start a little bit, before going too deep into the requirements in Valispace, just to give a little bit of the Valispace concept. Stefan already explained it, most of it, the idea or how it is used. But Valispace itself is not uniquely a requirement management tool. It is designed to be a system engineering tool. It actually started more as a concurrent design, so it has a lot of capability on calculating and defining architecture. And with time, we grow as a requirement tool as well. So we have a lot of modules, and they are all well connected. And you will get most of the powerful in Valispace of the power in Valispace when you use all the models connected. But well, you can also use only the requirements module, maybe with a little bit of the components, but you will also have pretty much of the feature requirements features are standalone as well. But today we will be focusing mostly on the requirements. I'll go really quickly on the components because there is a needed part there. But if you are interested in knowing more on other features and other capabilities, you can always write to us and schedule a demo, and keep also tuned on the following webinars that we will have, because we will have every month a new webinar with a different module or a different use case. Okay. So to start, the main concepts here on the requirements module are, well, we first have the folders there. You can see this is pretty much organizing feature where you can put your specifications inside it and move them as children, parent and children, just drag and drop to organize the way you want. We have the specifications, which is basically a group of requirements. So you see that I have selected here the customer specification, and we have on the right all the requirements inside that spec. We also have sections, which is a subgroup. I will explain that later, but a section exists inside of specification and basically is a subset of those requirements for the specification. And the requirements itself here, you have every line of the table, and inside that requirement, you have the expanded view where you have a lot of more information. I'll be explaining all of them. And well, those are the main ideas, the main concepts. But just to return to one point that Marco said yesterday, and it's one of the biggest concepts here in Valispace as well, is that ideally you should keep one specification per verifiable object. So I will show that a bit later, but you can see here that we have, for example, first a high-level operational and product specification. Later we have the subsystem specifications, and we can also start breaking it down into lower level elements. As long as you start having a big chunk, a big group of requirements defining one object, one verifiable object, you should create a specification. Of course, you can keep one huge specification with 10,000 requirements on it, on a single spec, but you will be losing a little bit of the flexibility. So always ask yourself, should I break it down into a new specification? Is this getting too much to handle? But with time, this is something you will get used to thinking. Okay, so most of you were on yesterday talk. For those who weren't, sorry. Marco started talking on first the customer needs. You will get all your customer needs. You'll probably have interviews, and you need to start collecting them. In case you already have those in Excel, in Google Sheet, or any other platform, you can directly import them from Valispace. So when I select here the specification, we have the option to import requirements from a file. So in this case, a CSV, or if you have doors, you can import it from doors. Or if you want to go a little bit more advanced, you can use the REST API to write some scripts to import your requirements from a given file, a specific file, or some other platform. But here we have this customer specification. We already started collecting. We can create those new customer needs whenever they come, just by clicking here, create new requirement. But well, before that, each specification, it will have here on the top some extra information. So the default components I will explain later, but you have the owner, so you will specify who is the person responsible for that specification. and you can have a description where you should write what exactly, where these requirements are coming from. For example, here we're just explaining that we did a first round of customers interview with the following customers: Acme Corp, Cyberdyne, and AirTrax. And we also have a document on the analysis that I will show later on. Oh, sorry, I didn't introduce before, but for those who didn't follow yesterday's webinar, our example is a Valispace, so autonomous flying vehicle for traveling in cities. As you can read here, the main use case or the main need is the Valispace transports 4 passengers within 15 minutes between 2 places within a city that are 15 kilometers apart at the cost of $60 per passenger. So you see that here, as a customer need, this is not, it's not a formal requirement. It's not too defined. So you should agree with your customers what are the main functionalities. Don't focus too much on the form. Just insist on clarification, as Marco said. Make sure that everybody agrees on the main parameters. And as you start discussing, adding these things here, you can discuss with your team. That's why we have the discussion feature here. So I started one discussion here that from our latest discussion with Acme company, we realized that the minimum flight duration should be increased to 20 minutes. And I marked Marco on that discussion, so Marco can discuss with the team, with the initial design team, to see if we can actually change that requirement or not. And then Marco can just reply that discussion to me, and whenever I'm satisfied with that, or we get into an agreement, I will close that status to resolved, and then we I'm with the admin. We can close that, and we will. This won't show here on the pop-up anymore.
Guys, sorry to interrupt. There's a question that's coming up in the has slides from Dave. Dave is asking, in the rationale, can you link to an analysis document? For example, if a requirement comes from a load analysis, can I link it directly in the rationale?
So today we cannot link it, but this is a feature that we can easily implement, because we, in the rationale, you can reference values, and I think also requirements, or just values. But in other fields in Valispace, you can use the $sign to reference other documentations. So I will take note of that, and I will ask the product team to add that feature, because it's a really simple one to implement. So thanks for the feedback. That's interesting. Okay, thanks, Stefan. Well, getting back for the initial discussion, especially at the beginning, you know that requirements will change before you decide. So it's always good to keep track on the requirements changes. So here on the expanded view for the requirements, you have the history tab that will show you how the text has been changing over time. So you see that we have been playing with it, changing from 10 to 15 kilometers, changing from 20 to 15 kilometers, and so on. So you have this full history here saying who changed, what was the action, and what exactly was changed on the requirement. So you can always go back to that. And on the same matter, we have the time machine feature that actually allows you to see all requirements at once, comparing between the two times. Okay. Another point is that it will be useful to share that requirements with your stakeholders. So for example, your customers. One way, the old way that I don't recommend, is to actually export this on Excel and then send an Excel to the customer, and then they will see it and then comment on top of it. But the Valispace way is you can create a dashboard, for example. So here I created a dashboard called customer needs. I added the requirements table, and this dashboard I can generate a shareable link. So if I go here under share, I can create a link, and I can send that link to my customer. And my customer will have access to that dashboard, always an updated version. So whenever I change the text, this will be automatically displayed, well, the latest version. And here, just one advanced trick. You see that I'm just seeing the customer needs specification because I added a filter. So if I come to edit visible columns, I can add the column specification. And you see that I have a filter here. So I'm filtering for the customer specifications. And I can just hide that column and the filter still applies. So you have whoops, I think so you have that table clean, so you can share that with your customers. So the next step, after we decide, we agree on our customer needs, is to actually start breaking down my requirements. So we can break it down into technical and non-technical requirements. So here we have the system specifications, and we created the operational specification and product specification. And by the way, to create one, if you want to create directly on a folder, you can right click and you'll have the create specification. Or if you click on this button, it will create on the high level, and then you can drag and drop to that folder. But when we start talking about breaking it down, it will be interesting to see the relationship between the requirements. So we have here, as I show, you can edit visible columns and then decide which parameters you have. And the first time you can edit them, and then you can save those views, that configuration of columns, and make a saved view that you can always come back later. So here I created a simple view, which is this one, just text, rationale, and text. And we have a relationship view that shows all the relationship of those requirements. So you can see here that we are already breaking down those requirements. This one, this customer need, it has a lot of information, so we definitely need to break it down. Say that we should fit 4 passengers, it should fly for 15 minutes, and at least 15 minutes, at least 15 kilometers range, and so on. So we have those child here. And if you want to see those child directly here, instead of having to click around and see and be going in every different places, you have the children tab here that you have a table of all your children. So you see, we have, for example, the requirements saying that should accommodate 4 people, and the requirements I mentioned. If you want, you can directly create children here. So if you just click create children, you can decide which specification it will go. You can define the identifier, and you can create on the go. But I always recommend that you go on the specification, look what already exists there, and then create, generate the connection.
Guys, sorry to interrupt. Very quick question from Ines. Are those saved views available for everyone or just for us?
It can be personal or public or private. So if I come here to save view, I can give it a name and define if it is private or public. So I think the name implies if it is public, everyone will have access to it. Thanks, Stefan.
And then one more. Well, there's actually a lot of questions popping up, so I'm afraid we won't be able to answer everything now while we go. But just one more about sharing and the permissions. Scott is asking, can you add access security controls to the shareable links, for example, to protect export controlled information?
On the online version of Valispace, if you because we have the online version and you have the self-hosted, so the online version, the shareable link will come to. It doesn't have any block. It's like a PDF. If you create a PDF, the person can send to everyone. However, if you have a self-hosted, then you can define on your firewall, on your network, you can define who has access to Valispace server or not. So that's one way to configure. But it is one feature that we want to implement sometime in the future. So the dashboards have a little bit more control. Okay, so let me just check on time. Okay. All right, another important point that Marco mentioned yesterday, and I always like to highlight on the trainings, is that you should always create a variable when you define your numerical requirements. So you see here that, for example, this 10 kilometer is just a text. So my recommendation is to always create a variable. For example, here you see that these 5 tons, it is a variable, so we can always reference these everywhere else. And if we need to change, the change will be propagated. And the advantage is also that you can just change the unit easily. Here we have 2 created, but if I modify this one and this one to kilos, you see that this one is converted to kilos, or if I need for the American public, I can change that to pounds and it will just display that in pounds. Well, you can also reduce the amounts of decimals and so on. So on this view is where you can actually see the your properties created. Here's when we were doing the example, we created a double one. So we can just delete that and create another one. But to show you how to create For example, here we have the minimum range is 10 kilometer. I will just remove that variable, use the $sign. And when you have the $sign, you can search for existing properties or create a new one. So here on create a new one, I can just say max range 10 and then kilometers. Oops. And then I create that variable here. So I always recommend you to do that. And that will also facilitate you later on if you want to break down your requirements. So for example, mass, you can just write equations and make a percentage breakdown. So whenever you increase these a little bit, the other ones will be calculated automatically. It depends on your margin philosophy or your breakdown philosophy, but you can write equations on those variables. That's another advantage.
Cauê, one question related to that from Dave. He's asking if units are a text field or whether there's actual conversions behind the scenes.
There is actual conversion. All the calculation in Valispace is on our Vali engine, and you will do as I showed here when I was changing between five. For example, if we go here to no, not kilometers, but if I change the 5,000 kilograms, if I change it to pounds, you will see that the value is actually converted. So Valispace is handling all of that. And when we start exploring the components, you will see that Valispace does much more than that. It does all the dimension analysis and all the calculations. So you don't need to worry about the units.
And one follow-up question is what happens if you try to convert a mass to a distance or other invalid conversions?
It will give you a warning, especially on the components when you're defining them. It will say, wait, I'm calculating something that should be distance and you're asking me for power, something is wrong. But here, since we are defining a constant value, it's up to you, right? Because if you say that it's 5,000 watts, then you will see that the unit is wrong, but there is no implication on what type of parameter this is at the requirements. But on the components, things will be handled properly. Okay. So as I started mentioning, we can do, after making that breakdown of my customer needs and specifying actually the requirements, we can start doing the system breakdown, the subsystems breakdown. So for example, here we have the mass, that the total mass, including passengers, should be 5 tons metric. We already created here the breakdown of those requirements. So you see all the children. If we see on the table, we see that we already started dividing that on several subsystems and specifications. That for example, the power subsystem shall not exceed 900. The propulsion subsystem shall provide a vertical lift of 40 kilonewtons, because this is also calculated regarding the total mass. And as I mentioned, you can create equations. So that's what we're doing here. Again, it depends on your philosophy on how to do the breakdown. I just want to show the possibilities in the tool. Is that for that specific requirement, the value is actually the total mass, so the 5 tons, multiplied by 17.5%. So whenever I change that to, for example, to 6 or 5.5, that value will be recalculated and updated with the new value. Okay. Okay, the children. Let me just make sure that I mentioned everything. Okay, so the other topic that Marco mentioned, and it's a recurring question that we have, is how do I handle software requirements in Valispace? And our main suggestion or approach is to actually first describe your software needs. So here we create a specification for our software needs, and we can keep the description a bit loose. And then we will do the same thing as we did as customers needs. We will break down into more technical and defined requirements. But just make sure that you keep the traceability of why exactly do we have that requirement. So in this case, the software shall be able to plan and execute flight, given a start and ending location. So this is coming to the requirement that specified the autonomous flight, right? And then we actually break down into what this whole sentence means in terms of software. And we keep a whole folder for the software architecture here saying, okay, the flight software shall run in real time. It shall be able to execute the actuators and so on. So we recommend you to break down into those specifications and separate between a need and an actual software requirement. And the tags here is something that can be quite useful. And we recommend you, if you have the software, probably at the beginning of the project, you will have one version of the software that you have the set of requirements, but over time you will need to add new requirements, and you need to have some traceability of the version. So you can use the tags for defining which version this is related to, or this was started. So for example, here I already created a tag. So for the software version 1.1, I can add a tag, or if I want, I can also create a new tag right here. So 1.2, for example, and it creates a new tag. If you want to change the color, you can go to under settings. And another tip that a lot of people don't know yet is that you can actually select multiple components, multiple requirements, and add the tags in bulk. Okay. And that's a good way for you to have a clear vision of where this requirement or when this requirement was created related to the software version. And just know that you can also filter. So if you want to see all the requirements that are coming from the version 1.2, for example, you can just click on the filter button here and then select which tag you want, and you have that filter applied. Another important point is the saved views. They also save filter. So if you have a filter that you always need to add because for a specific workflow, you can create the filter and then save the view, and you will have that always available. Okay. Another big discussion is how to handle standards. So our main suggestion is import all your standards that is applicable for your system and subsystems in Valispace. Keep them on a separate folder. You shouldn't be editing them because it is a standard. So here we just have a really small example of a couple of standards for ergonomics. So again, you'll probably need to import this from an Excel or a doors. We are working now on a RecIF importer, or as I mentioned, the API can do almost everything as long as you have the resource to develop some scripts. But the main idea here is that we have the standards, and then we can start actually applying. Okay, the standard that the seats shall be safe and comfortable for passengers between 1.5 and 2.2 meters high. So of course, this breakdown will be much bigger when we start defining the system, but just an example here, we have one requirement for the seat that's saying that the forward distance between seats should be at least 0.5 meters. So you have that traceability, and then you can see what is coming from standards and how this is impacting your system.
Cauê, one question about the standards. Someone asked earlier, would you treat a regulation requirement in the same way as a specification?
Yes, I will treat all the regulations and standards. You just make sure that you keep them separate on a separate folder so you know where they live, because then you'll have the traceability of, okay, if I am on looking at the cabin, I haven't touched, I am another engineer, I'm working on the seats, and I don't know if you want to know which requirement is coming from a standard or not, you will see on the parents or even on the connections, for example, you will see that, okay, this is actually coming from this requirement that is a standard, so I cannot touch it. I can talk if there is some wiggle room, but if it is a standard, I cannot touch it. And well, I showed here the connections, and this connection will show the direct connections of the given requirement. So just to show a better example, we have it here, for example, the breakdown of the masses. We see that that requirement has a parent for the customer need, and it has its children, but that it's only the connections for that requirement. And if you want to see, you can either see the connections for the entire specification. So if you have a specification selected, you can see the connections. In this case, it doesn't have any internal connection, only external. Or if you want, you can go to all requirements and then see all the connections between all requirements and all specifications. So you can click and highlight the connections. And this is the requirements view. But if you also want to see, you have the specification view saying which specification is driving what. And that's another way, like you will see, for example, a standard or a regulation, you'll see which specifications this is touching.
Cauê, one question about this was also asked earlier. What visualization methods are available to understand propagation when there are changes in the requirements?
Yeah, so those are the main visualization. We have the status, but then is already for verification. But we have these connections that allows you to see the traceability of your requirements. So you can see either on a global view or on a local view when you go to each one of the requirements. Okay, and coming back to the standards, one thing that is useful is you can actually see the number of verified children. So when you applied it, you will see all the requirements that are children of this standard, and you will see if they are all fulfilled or not. So this is an easy way to see if something coming from a standard has not been fulfilled yet. Okay. So when after we define the requirements, we make the breakdown, then we need to start actually working on our verification planning. So how are we going to check if those requirements are valid or not? So I have another saved view here for the verification view, which I enable the verification methods. So right at the beginning of the project, you don't need to worry which test procedure or what you're doing. You can just start setting which or how you're going to verify it. So for example, we have that the Valispace shall accommodate 4 people. A review is enough, or inspection. It should be exclusively electrically a review as well. But for example, the Valispace shall be able to take off, fly, land, and fully autonomously. I cannot never say that word properly the first time. So on the verification method here, we can first have an analysis. So we will probably have a flight simulation that we will prove that everything is working properly. But we also need to make a test, probably without passengers the first time. So we can add a verification method here. It created. Sorry about that. I created a new verification method and defined, okay, this is actually will be verified by a test. So here you can start populating and saying, okay, these requirements need a test, these requirements just need an inspection or a review and so on. And then after you populate all of that, you need to define, okay, where actually we are going to verify those, what this is applicable to. So that's where the components module come, because for each verification method, you need to define a component to say where this is going to. So if you don't want to use Valispace to do your system architecture and all your performance, and this is a whole new world, a whole new webinar to talk about all the calculations and how things can be designed in Valispace and all the automatic calculation. But you will need at least to have overall tree or system breakdown here in the components module. It doesn't need to have properties if you're not interested in that module, but this will be useful to make all the traceability and all the links. And I quickly show here that we have those components and our system breakdown and so on. So when you're doing the requirements, you will start then defining where those requirements needs to be verified. And we have the default component for specification. So if you know that all requirements here is applicable for, in this example, for the high level, because it's a product specification, I can assign a component here, the Valispace 5000. And once I assign it, it is applied to every one for every component. Or if I am, for example, on the propulsion, I can also select manually for if it is a high level. For example, here we have that the propulsion subsystem shall provide a total 40 kilonewtons. So these apply for the propulsion system. But here we have each rotor shall provide a minimum thrust. So here we are actually applying for all the 4 rotors. So you can either select all of them, and then each one, you can work with each one as a single status or a unified status for the verification method. So in this example, we have all together and we have just one status. So if we verify, we'll verify to all, or you can use the combine verification method on the edit visible column to split that status. So here, combine verification, no, and then you have one status per component. All right. How are we in
I just want to
time?
let you know that we have about 15 to 20 minutes left.
In total, yeah. So
Yes.
yeah, just 5 or less minutes and then I can finish that. So, right. So for the verification methods, in this case, let's go back to the project. We have here the analysis, and each verification method, we have those verification methods: analysis, inspection, review, rules, and test, but you can customize them, rename, or create new ones. But each one of them can have a specific closeout reference type. So for review inspection, it is a manual closeout reference. Well, in this case, we set it up as a document, but you can just manually change as verified or not. The rule verification method is the one that will do an automatic verification if you're using the components module. So on the components module, we will have, for example, the total mass of our actual design. For example, the requirement here is that it should be 5,000 or 5.5 tons. In my actual design currently, given all our design options, it is weighting 5.2. So we are comparing those two values, and every time that an engineer changes anything, this value will be recalculated, and that recalculated value will be reevaluated on the verification, and it will have automatically the status of it. I can quickly show that. I think we have time. So here I selected the rules, and as a closeout reference, I can write that rule. So we are basically comparing the two variables. So the Valispace mass should be smaller or equal than the actual weight of our system. So this is the max weight. And when I press enter, this rule, or I click done, this rule will be generated, and you'll see that it is verified already. You will see that it was verified at that time by that user. And if we open the rule, you will see that currently our Valispace is 5,000. And this is a way for the engineers to quickly see their impacts on changes. So if I change the rotor diameter or the thickness of the shell, I will see if I'm breaking any requirements or not.
One question appeared here, whether we can verify by child, and if all child requirements are verified, will the parent be automatically verified as well?
Yeah, so we have that field for the number of verified child and verified methods. And on the engine overall, a requirement will only be considered verified when all the children is also and all the verification methods is verified, but you can easily see that here. The analysis, and you can also set the review. You can attach a document. So either analysis that you write on the analysis module, I will briefly show in a minute. So you can say, okay, this analysis is proving that this requirement is verified. So for example, a simulation report. And the test, you will link an actual test procedure. So for example, our flight test that we will perform with autonomous, I can either create here on the go a test if we don't have created yet, or if an engineer already planned testing, they can create on the testing module. That we already did a quick some webinar a couple of months ago that you can find online. But here, for example, I can create a test procedure. So lift off test, for example, and we can create that test procedure. And this test procedure will be the closeout reference for this requirement. Okay, just finally, just to quickly show here the analysis document. I don't remember now if I show that, but for example, we have one document here that we keep track of all our logic behind the customer needs. For example, here I write all the customers that we made some interviews. I created a link to the documents that we created that summarize that. So you have a quick access to this document always. And below we have the table with the customer needs, the same way we have on the dashboards. And these documents, you can make it larger, but you can also create a shareable link or download as a PDF as the dashboards. And here, just a glance of what is coming up down below. But here we have the requirements, another table with the verification methods, and we are developing more dashboards blocks or documents blocks for your requirements. So for example, a burn up chart that will have the variation of the number of verifications that you have on your system and the number of verified requirements. So you can easily see the progress of your project, your system over time. And well, I think that's it. There is a lot I could be talking about Valispace over and over. There is a lot on the test module for you to learn the components. So I invite you to see the previous webinars and the future ones as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for this whole presentation, Cauê. We have a whole lot of questions still waiting.
Good.
So I think the remaining 12 minutes, we'll use at least 7 of them to try and answer some of the questions that are coming up. Maybe to answer everyone, so if you want the Valicopter 5000 project, we can definitely make sure to put that in the deployments. I'm happy to say that there's so much excitement. So maybe just after the presentation, you can just drop us an email and let us know. I already noted that Sophia and Scott wanted that one. Then there was a specific question still on the, maybe you can choose them, Cauê, directly from there. And if you want to show anything in Valispace, you go from there. But there was one specifically on when you verify by rules with the mass example, if a child changes so that the rule is now broken, will the verification auto change to red?
Can you repeat that? I don't know what exactly changed.
So basically, if one of the automatic verifications is broken on a child level, will it automatically propagate on the parent level to automatically tell you that it's broken?
Well, not necessarily, because for example, here on the mass breakdown, my propulsion system could be breaking, but my overall system maybe not. So you will see that the number of verified children won't be completed, but it depends. As I said, for example, our requirement on the propulsion system is, for example, 1.3 tons. If my propulsion system is 1.35, but overall the sum is still below 5.5, this requirement will not be verified, but this one will still be verified. But you will see that, well, the rule will be verified, but you will see that the children is not. Does that answer the question?
I would suggest if there's any specific follow-up questions, we can always schedule a separate call. I have a feeling that maybe it's a specific one of someone who's already using Valispace.
Could you link? I see one vote here. One question: can you link parent from another project? Currently not, but it's something we are adding, so it will be possible soon. You will be actually. No, I don't think it's already available, but it will be available soon. So yeah. I cannot mark as answered. Stephanie, if you're still there, you can mark that as answered.
I will do that.
Thanks. For the time machine feature, can you only see the history of requirements text or see the history of any combination of fields? In principle, you could see the other fields. There are some new fields that we added on the requirements that we still need to add on the time machine. However, on the history table, you should see all the changes, even on the method. As you see here, I updated the method to review. So on the database, you do have full history control. So if there is something that you're missing here that you don't see on Valispace, please let us know and we'll be happy to implement that change or to add the extra fields. If I want my customers to have their own way to comment on the requirements, can I export the customer view? Yes. So if I come to the customer specification, for example, on the 3 dots here on the table, you have export table as CSV or Excel. Another possibility that it's a little bit better, and we are working a lot to make it even better, but you can create a user for your customer. If you have a small set of customers, for example, might be easier, but you can create a customer and then assign the permissions to view only and view only the customer spec. So they will have access to that specification, but not the rest. And then they can actually start discussions or comment on it. It depends on how close the relationship is with your stakeholder. So, and another thing that we will add sometime in the future is to allow you to open discussions on the shareable link dashboards. So the user can already just add something there instead of having to log in on Valispace. That will be much more helpful.
And one question related to that just popped up, if we can delete or mark as resolved some of our customers' comments.
Yes, yeah, so currently the discussion can only be closed by the person who opened it, and now I'm logged in with the admin. But for example, if I change that, please review. So whenever this discussion is finalized, I can just change the status to resolved. And then it's marked to resolve. It doesn't show up here as the icon. And on the project, you will see the list of all the discussions. And you can also create tasks if you need. The task management is another feature as well. You have the full timeline, but I don't think we have enough time to talk about it.
Next time.
Yeah, next time. Can you import from other files beside DORS or Excel, like Word document with defined delimiters? Yes, I've done a lot of scripts reading from Word documents. For example, there was a FAA document that was sent to me, and we quickly wrote a script to read through it. So if you have developers or people with knowledge in Python programming, for example, it is quite straightforward to write that. To write a script to read it. Hopefully your document is well structured, so programmatically you can find where the identifier is, where the text is. If the document is a mess, then it's a bit complicated. But if you feel free to just send a message to me or to support at Valispace, and I'll be happy to help with that. And on that matter, just out of curiosity, I always say, like, our REST API, so our interface with external world, is completely open. So you can always program or automate things with a Python script or any other language that you can do web requests. So there is a lot of possibilities there. Could you elaborate on the FMA requirements? Yes, I kept that to the end because I wasn't sure if I would have time. On the future, we are already discussing, we want to have a full risk management module in Valispace. So this will come in the future. But currently, the way that some customers are working, and it's working quite well, you create a specifications for your risk register. So you write your high level risks. So crash of helicopter, emergency landings, interruption of service. And then you can create the failure modes that will have as parent the risk. So for example, rupture of rotor blade, that will actually cause the risk 19, which is the crash of helicopter. And then as child of those failure modes will be the countermeasures. So for example, engine stop working, the countermeasure is the helicopter must be able to emergency land with at least 3 engines. So that's one way that you can keep track of your risk. And of course, you can do a lot with the properties as well. If you want to calculate probabilities and risk and all of that, you can use the calculation in Valispace to do a lot of that, either on the components module or directly on the requirements.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Cauê. Very happy to see that there were so many questions. Thank you, everyone, for sharing all your questions on the HAS slides. So this brings us to almost the very end of the session. I just have a few more small things to share with you, and I will just reshare my screen. If you can just confirm that you can see my screen again.
Yes.
Fantastic. So I want to briefly invite everyone who is interested in design studies, trade-offs, and also the components module, which was shared today, to our next webinar series, which will be in the end of May. You can find them on our website and also in the follow-up email where we share our recording with you. There will be a link for you to sign up there. And then besides that, for those of you who are still in the HAS slides, we'd love to hear which other topics you'd be curious to hear about next, because I'm sure that today's session probably also spurred quite a few other topics that we unfortunately couldn't cover that much today. Okay, so analysis and documentation is probably a very interesting one to dive a bit more in depth with. So if you have any ideas, you're more than welcome to share them now or also afterwards by email. We'd be very, very happy to hear your inputs. Connectivity with Jira, budgeting. Yeah, yesterday that also came up. Budgets, mass budgets, power budgets, testing. This is something that we actually already did a webinar on. We can share the link with you. But what would be interesting is if you can then also let us know what specifically about testing you may be interested in learning about. So maybe we can have a separate session on that as well. Interfacing with MATLAB, definitely a very interesting one.
If I can just drop something on interfacing with MATLAB, we do have a toolbox that allows you to connect with MATLAB. So it's pretty much as read and write. So you can read everything from Valispace and you can also write things. So you can see on our documentation the MATLAB toolbox and also the SDK plugin that currently it's only working with SDK 11. If I'm not wrong, we need to update it, but we have the add-on that allows you to connect with it.
Thank you so much for sharing, everyone. So this brings us to the very final part of our session today, and I believe we have perfect timing. We have 1 minute left. So first of all, I want to thank everyone who participated today for all the questions, for all the interactions. We're very excited to see everyone's curiosity and to help you out wherever we can. So stay tuned for the next webinars. And thank you so much for joining again. If you have any feedback afterwards, also after a follow-up email, please share this with us because as you see, these are our first attempts at making an educational webinar series. So if there's any suggestions that you have or topics you want to hear from, formats you'd be curious about, we'd be more than happy to hear. Thank you again, everyone, and I wish you all the best.